So, hi everybody, this is Hustle Hub. I'm Giacomo, and today I'm with a special guest, Christine Wong. She has her own channel. She mainly talks about consulting. So, Christine, please give an introduction of yourself. Uh, what is your job title, and what motivated you to get in this field?
Sure. So my name is Christina. I'm based out of New York, and I am a technology consultant at Accenture in New York. So I guess to kind of start off, I did study at Boston University studying finance, management, information systems, and strategy and innovation. So that's actually one reason why I was interested in technology consulting, because I was like, well, management information systems, what could I do with that? And when I looked at all the career paths, technology consulting was one of them. So I was like, okay, I want to be, what's the best job to do in my 20s? And consulting, I think like most people would know. If you don't know, it just has a lot of traveling. But
Yeah.
unfortunately, with the pandemic, the traveling has stopped. But I think that after the pandemic, traveling will still kick off. Like I still know some people that are traveling, but that is one big reason. And one thing is that I like technology. I just didn't know what. So consulting was a great way to see, okay, I could try this project out and try that project out and then see what I like before I really settle down.
Okay. So, one, let's say, broad question
Mhm.
is, um, why do you think so many graduates want to get into consulting compared to other large, maybe Fortune 500 companies?
Yeah.
Why is it so attractive to get into consulting?
I think I like to break it up into three reasons, really. One is like exactly what I said is the traveling means that, oh, I'm young, I can do whatever I want to do, get all those like cool hotel perks, fly first class, which by the way does not happen. That's a
Okay.
misconception. And then they think that it's a glamorous life, but it really honestly isn't, because if you go to this like middle of nowhere, you're kind of stuck there. It's not like you're always going to go to New York City, Los Angeles, Miami, or even out of the country. But that is one. The other one is that if you don't know what you want to do, consulting is perfect because you learn all the hard skills and the soft skills without actually knowing like, oh, maybe I do want to go into biology or I do want to go into business, and kind of pigeonholing your way through, because you could try many things and see what you want to do. And then I think the third one is that a lot of the people think consulting is very prestigious. You get like a lot of money, you get the reputation, you get the brand name of the firm that you're at. And because of that, it does help you later down in your career path. But it does, again, depend on your country, and it does depend on your firm of that. But I think it really is like, what kind of experience did you get out of it? Because I see a lot of people that go to boutique firms that are smaller firms that not necessarily the biggest reputation, but they do as well as like the other people in the bigger firms as well.
Okay. Did you get the chance of traveling before the pandemic stopped everything? And do you think traveling will continue after this situation and with the restrictions loosening up?
Yes, I did get to travel to California, Chicago, Wisconsin, DC. I was even able to go internationally as well to Iceland, Denmark, and Netherlands. So that was actually pretty cool. I think like it's not typical, especially
Yeah.
for if you start out. And moving forward, I think there will still be travel because virtually it's so hard to do a lot of design sessions. If you think about those as like the whiteboard session, it's hard to do that virtually. It's better to be all in one room where you're looking at one board and you're all together on one page, instead of someone like, oh wait, by the way, like you were on mute, or maybe like, oh, you were lagging for a second, I could not tell what you were trying to do. So it's just a lot better to do things specifically for the ones that are interactive in person. But I think a lot of it will probably scale back in travel, because like maybe like calls like this, or calls where you're just trying to get something done, is going to be pretty easy to do virtually, but the ones interactive in person, those are still going to be there.
So, okay. So you went through the hiring process at Accenture. Can you break that down? And how does Accenture process differs from other consulting process, like the Big Four processes and the management consulting firms like BCG, McKinsey, and so on?
Mhm. So my process, I think, is already different than I think most people that are not coming in as a campus hire, if you are going in as a campus hire, you probably will have a similar process. So for me, it was through Boston University. The recruiter was already affiliated with Boston University. They're not students or alumni from it. They're just like, okay, we know Boston University is a target school. So for that reason, they have an actual quota of number of people to hire from Boston University. So the hiring process is that they had a school portal posting on, and then we were like, the technology development program, consulting development program, and security development program. So those three roles were out there. I applied for actually consulting development program and the technology development program, but they only selected me for the technology development program, and that's really the technology consulting side. Consulting development program is more management consulting. So after that, the first one was actually on campus, and it was a behavioral interview for 1 hour. After that, like a week later, we did have it in person, and that's going to be on their Boston office, and that's going to be like a case interview and also behavioral interview. That's also the final round too. So all of this was in Boston. So regardless of like which office you were recruited for, you're just going to be going there because they're recruiting specifically from Boston University. So that was my process. But I think like most people who are not from Boston University or not from campus hire, or even if they're an experienced hire, they're going to be a different process for me. And I would say that it is going to be different from year to year, firm to firm, even country to country for every process. So it's not really easy for me to say like how other processes are like compared to mine. But a common factor is that they will always do some kind of behavioral interview to see what kind of person you are. And they'll also do a case interview. I think like recently a lot have been saying like, yeah, we're not going to do a case interview, but we're going to do more of like a presentation style. Like you pitch something to us, or something where like they make you do like a digital assessment, or that they have like an assessment center where you have like a series of things you need to do. But it does change over the years. And I mean, when I first did it, it has changed. And then now, like because of the pandemic, they did adapt to that as well. I don't know if they're going to stick to that process because it is actually working pretty well. But moving forward, it could be back to the same process I had.
Okay, so you talked about behavioral interviews. So what are the questions like, and what are they looking for in a consultant from a behavioral perspective?
It's been 3 years ago, so I don't really remember on the top of my head, but they're very typical questions like, oh, what are your strengths and weaknesses? Why Accenture? Why consulting? And then a few also about like, what are you planning on doing a few years down the line? What's your goal out of this? The typical questions. I think the case interview is the part that's a little bit different from all throughout. Because it's more technology consulting based. A lot of people in consulting, they prepare for management consulting cases, and then they go into these technology consulting cases and like, what is this? It's completely different. There's no resources out there online about it. So you kind of have to like use what you have in your brain to react on that. But the same skills do apply in terms of your problem solving and communication skills.
Okay. So you talked about case interviews. So can you go a bit more in detail about how IT consulting case interviews differ from management consulting case interviews, and do they get into the specifics of the technologies you have to use in order to solve the problem or not?
So I think that what they're looking for is pretty similar. Like, how well do you communicate? What's your problem solving skills? Like, what is the logic you're going through? That is pretty much the same that they're looking for. The content of the case itself will be different. So for example, in management consulting, you may get like a profit tree, like, oh, we're right, like maybe I don't know, like Barnes and Nobles is running out of money. They want to branch out to something that brings more profit, and that could be the problem statement. But for technology consulting, you can have something more about like, oh, we're interested in going into blockchain. Tell me about why I should do this. Does it fit these requirements? And if so, how should we go about it? So it does require some knowledge about technology. You don't need to literally do the technology in front of you. Like, it's not a coding exam. Some technical roles may have a coding exam, but for cases specifically, they really want to see your thought process of, if you were a consultant in this situation, how would you react? I think the difference in terms of the focus could be that in technology consulting case interviews, a little bit more focused on practicality and the risk factors, because it's really more about doing rather than the strategic part of it. So that's what I would say is the main focus. And I think like one of the best ways to prepare for it is actually through current events and really learning about technology out there.
Okay. So one thing that I think is not really clear out there is how Accenture differs from the Big Four. So what
Mm-hmm.
are the services that Accenture does different, and what are the services that both Accenture and Big Four firms offer to their clients?
Yes, I think when you think of the Big Four, you think accounting firms, and that's what they really are. Accenture actually used to be Anderson Tax, so they used to be part of the Big Five, but they recently just, well, not recently, it was like 20, 30 years ago, they were like, okay, bye-bye, we're going to do Accenture, we're just going to be consulting. And sorry, I have like my cat just on my desk right now. So we're gonna do consulting right now. And then I think like the biggest focus right now for Accenture compared to the other firms is technology. Like when you think Accenture, you think technology. You think of Big Four, you probably think accounting or management consulting. But I think like some firms are trying to sharpen up their technology offerings. So that's why they're showing up a little bit more. But usually Accenture is best known for technology. So regardless if you're interested in consulting, if you're just interested in technology, there's roles out there like that too. So it's like innovation hubs or building products and technology with that's not even client facing as well.
Okay, okay. So um, I took a look at um, Accenture business model, and one thing that is a big deal for Accenture is outsourcing. So can you tell us a bit more? What is it? What Accenture offers, and why companies decide to take consultants from Accenture rather than employing technical people themselves?
Yes, I think one big reason why it's big at Accenture is because of our size. I think we have a lot of people all around the world to do that. So one big reason why people go for outsourcing that is within Accenture or a consulting firm in general, outside of like maybe their own company, is that we have the expertise or we have the manpower for it. So let's say, for example, you are the US government and you need to have like a call center. You probably don't have that much time to hire a call center. So you're just going to go to like a group of people that have a call center ready and you just have to train them. So vice versa, like there's a lot of other projects out there that like, why couldn't they just hire internally for technology consultants and then they still go to Accenture because we also do have experience and knowledge of being in a global scale. So maybe like they don't have experience of going into Oracle for a global implementation because they're just like that company. They're not even in technology. They're probably like a nonprofit. So instead they go to a company like Accenture that has experience with Oracle specifically and that they have the global experience to be able to execute that.
Okay, okay. So um, I think right now it's pretty clear what Accenture does. But if somehow somebody that wants to get in IT consulting doesn't get to go to Accenture, what are the other firms that focus on the same business on the same things that Accenture does? Is it perhaps Big Four or other companies like IBM?
I think the first question I would usually ask them is first off, why are you interested in technology consulting? Are you just interested in technology or you're interested in a particular technology? Because if that's the case, you can focus on a boutique firm that specializes in that technology. So let's use the example of blockchain. You could go to Accenture for blockchain, but if you want to learn a little bit more blockchain, you can also go to a specific boutique firm in blockchain, and that way you learn a lot more. I think like the downside behind it is that it's a little bit harder to leave that area because you're stuck and pigeonholed into blockchain. You'd have to leave the company in that case to be able to get that exposure. But it really is like, okay, are you interested in a particular part of tech, or maybe even the beauty of tech of consulting is like maybe you want to travel, then you can consider other consulting firms. It's not something that's like, okay, if I don't have technology consulting and I don't have Accenture, it's the end of the world. It really is like what you're looking for and then see what firms or even what types of companies go for that because you don't always need to be in a consulting firm to do something like consulting. There's also internal consulting as well.
Okay, okay. So another thing is I took a look at ESG ratings for Accenture, and Accenture did better than most of its competitors. Do you see that firsthand that Accenture uh, pays attention to environmental and social issues within the company?
I can't really speak for that because working from home, I'm only stuck on my client projects. I don't really know exactly what happens. But I think like for most people in a big firm or big company, they're gonna probably say the same. They're just like very stuck in what they're doing, but they don't really know what the company is doing. Like even within New York, I don't even know what they're doing.
Okay, okay. So you know all your colleagues and so on. So is the perfect hire for Accenture, do they mostly come from a tech background or a economics and finance background? What is more likely to get hired at Accenture?
There's a lot of roles within Accenture. It's not just consulting. So if you're interested in tech, there are tech roles that are not consulting. There's consulting as well. And then anything like with soft skills or hard skills of consulting, you can get in there as well. There's also corporate functions, which a lot of people forget about, is that we are just a company too. We're not just do consulting. So if you're interested in like maybe doing HR for Accenture, you could do that as well. So I think like really there's something for everyone here. It's just a matter of where do you fit and if that particular location you're looking for has that particular role.
Okay, okay. So you're an IT consultant and you work especially on Workday, right?
Mm-hmm.
So can you tell us a bit more what is Workday and why so many companies are using this software and why is it so necessary for them to hire Accenture consultants to do the work for them?
Yeah, so Workday is a enterprise resource planning software, and I think actually Workday just recently said they don't want to be labeled that anymore. They just want to be known as like a software you can use for a lot of other things. So they kind of want to go branch out from that. So that's what they are known in the past, I guess, what I'm going to say. And what I do mostly is Workday Financial. So mostly what the financial and accounting teams on a company side would be using, like anything to create journals or supplier invoices, procurement, business assets, customer invoice, like basically anything regarding money, that's what it is. So that is what I mostly do on the functional side. So what that means is on the functional side is I talk to the business, specifically the client, and say like, hey, what are you looking to do? What are the kind of approval flows you want to go through? What's the logical flow of how you would want to see a journey from start to end? And then I would implement that into the software. So for my role, I actually don't have a lot of coding. Actually, I don't even have any coding at all, but it's really just like mapping the logical flows. There's a lot of if and then statements, a lot of logical flows of like, okay, does this need to be required? Then if that is showing up, then what field should show up instead? That kind of thought. And a lot of this, I think, it's really just the reason why people like Workday is because it's cloud. So everyone, especially during the pandemic, a lot of people are trying to go towards cloud. So Workday is one of them. Salesforce is another. So that I think is one big reason why a lot of people like Workday.
Okay, okay. So you talked about how you're working from home. Some companies, make an example. I heard from a big statement from the Morgan Stanley CEO that they want employees to go back to the office. Do you think it will be the same for consultants, or do you think there will be a balance between people going back and people staying at home?
I think it really does depend on the firm itself because I think some of their culture, like, yes, we need to be there. That's just what we've always done. But then some other firms are like, oh, we've seen that it's okay to be remote. We've seen it worked. And I think for Accenture, at least through the messaging I've gotten, and I don't want to really get it misconstrued, is that we want to be as safe as possible and take care of our employees' health. So we're not forcing anyone to go to the office. We're also not forcing anyone to stay at home. So it really is like if you want to go, you can go. And I think like a lot of times with the client engagements, it's really is like, is it client essential? Are you required to go? If you don't have to go, then it's probably not even required to go in the first place. So at least that's the communication I've received, and that's the feeling I've gotten from the people up there.
Okay, okay. So in one of your videos, you talked about the difference between work and bringing value to the firm, and how bringing value to the firm give you a better chance of being promoted. So can you tell us a bit more about this concept and why is it so important to bring value to the firm in order to get promoted?
Yes, I think if I understand what you're saying exactly, is the work means client work, and then bringing value to the firm is internally, right? Is that what
Okay,
you're trying to say?
yeah, yeah,
Okay,
yeah.
so the client work is what your job is. Like that's your bare minimal. You should be doing your work well. And then the bringing value to the firm is that you want to make sure you're not just a number. Are you going to be someone who brings value to the firm? In what way? Like, are you going to bring in impact? And with a bigger firm, you tend to have these kind of questions too, because Otherwise, you're just a number. They want to see, okay, are you excelling compared to your peers at like either your location and your level? And if so, what are you doing for the firm? It's not just like you're doing the job, because otherwise it can easily swap you in and get someone else that can do the work. I think it's actually pretty easy to get someone like that nowadays. But really, it's just like, what kind of work ethic do you bring in? I think like honestly, being a good worker, being a good communicator, that's like bare minimal. I think at that point, it's really just where do you stand out? Make your personal brand. That's really important, because otherwise people are not going to know who you are. And when they do have that performance achievement discussion, they want to know like, oh, that's the person that did that. And that's the reason why they would excel a lot better.
Okay. So another thing is, what are the skills, both technical and soft skills, that you need to have in order to thrive at a company like Accenture?
So I guess I'll specifically talk about in consulting. So I think the hard skills in technology consulting is really like whatever software or technology you're wanting to focusing on, to know at least something about it. Like if you're going to be a functional or in the business side, at least know how it works and what it means to do whatever you're talking about. But then if you're on the technical side, actually know how to do it, because that's like basically what your job is. However, there's a soft skill side, which is more on the client side as well, of like, okay, if the client were to say this kind of thing, like how would you react? Or what if they did give you like a difficult situation, but they need the solution? How would you work that out? I think a lot of times, like the soft skills is pretty much the same as any other job. The only difference is that you have to deal with another factor. Instead of just your employer, you also deal with your employer's employer.
Okay.
So now you have like a lot of different drama going on of like, oh, your team or your manager or Accenture, or in this case, your client. And with the client, how do you even balance that out? Like the persuasion, even trying to make sure that you have everything set, because you're always going to get doubts of like, oh, you're just right out of university, and why should we trust you compared to this person who's been 30 years in the industry? So you need to kind of bring up like, okay, this is why you should trust me. So there's also that factor as well of like, okay, well, I'm going to show myself up at work, and then this is how I'm going to put myself. So that is a huge factor, is really making sure you get recognition from all ends as well.
Okay. So in Accenture, I think since you get hired as a fresh graduate, you need to do a lot of courses in order to master what you do. But on the other side, what are the skills that you need to have before getting hired, both technical and soft skills? What are those skills that will make you stand out in the hiring process?
Everything I just said before, but they probably will not expect you to be a master in technology, because they're going to still have all the training for you. Because I mean, like regardless of how amazing you are in a technology, they're still going to make you go through training as well, because they want to say like, oh, they've gone through this certification or they've gone through this training, so there's like a baseline knowledge about that. So that is the only difference. I think like that's why it makes consulting so appealing to people, is that it's easy to get in and it's also easy to get out. So I think like for that reason, it is just something that if you have the resources, go for it. If you don't have the resources, there's also a lot of ways you can get pro bono consulting, which is a way where you get real hands-on experience with consulting with like maybe like a local business or a nonprofit. So the technology consulting community that I founded actually has a program like that. So if you're something that's something you're interested in and that you don't have it either at your school, or maybe you're doing a full-time job and you're trying to pivot into technology consulting, that's also a good way to kind of get those skills and experience as well.
Okay, so you talked about it's easy to get in and it's easy to get out. So do you know anybody that left IT consulting, an IT consulting position, and what are the best exit opportunities for IT consultants?
I hate to say this, but it always depends on what you're doing in consulting. So let's give you an example of what I'm doing. I'm doing Workday Financial on the functional side, so it's more on the business side. So I could technically go to any company that is live in Workday Financials, and I would be like an administrator. Another way could be like I could work at Workday, or I could work in a finance team, or I could even go completely differently and go into like a business analyst role, or even like accounting role. I don't know why would I do that, but that is an option. So that is like all the paths I could do is based off of my role. However, there's also a lot of fields out there that like consultants for the thinking or the lifestyle we had to deal with. So venture capital could be one, startup, entrepreneurship. management consulting, if I wanted to go over there, all of these open doors, but I think it really is specific to whatever you end up doing. So a lot of people who start out, like let's say, for example, if you're a student that comes in and you haven't actually specialized in anywhere, you could still base it off of the few projects that you've had under your belt. So maybe you did mostly data science and then eventually you did AI. You could do any roles within that, even though your title doesn't say that. So that really is just like whatever experience you make out of it, which is why I think it's easy to get out, because if you said you had one project that does everything that this one company wants, you can easily move out there. And they always like consultants because of that very reason, that you have to be quick to adapt and quick to learn as well for everything you do.
Okay. So back to the hiring process, you talked about that you were in a business fraternity at university. So you talked about the. Can you tell us a bit more about the pros and cons of being in a business fraternity, and does that help in a hiring process?
Yeah, so I guess I'll first explain what is a business fraternity for those who are watching
Yeah.
or listening to this and don't know what it is. So it is technically a form of Greek life. In this case, it's a professional fraternity. So think of it more about like it is a club with brotherhood or sisterhood. It's not like just a normal club of membership. Because you do have to rush in. So in this case, there's a process where you go to rush events and then you have to get them to like you, and vice versa. Do you like them? Go through the process, and then you go join the pledge process. And that's where you tend to learn a lot about business, careers, or even about the fraternity or sorority, wherever you're in. But the reason why I really like a business fraternity is because you get that camaraderie of being in a social fraternity or sorority, but it's more professional based. So you can go and do a lot of cool things. Like, for example, we did a tour about a co-working space. We went to like a lot of offices. We had guest speakers coming in. Not to mention, it's not just a club, it's also a part of a network. So you do have a lot of alumni as well that have been all around the world. So if, like, let's say, for example, I want to talk to someone in Google, I can easily look into the database and say like, oh, this alumni works at Google. And then because of that connection of that business fraternity, you can reach out to them. So there's also a lot of other chapters around the country in the US. And you can easily say like, oh, maybe I'm in California right now, and then I want to go to Miami for an internship. And then like, okay, maybe I could go reach out to a chapter near there, and then we can reach out and have a coffee. So it's really great socially, but also professionally as well, because at the times where you do want to learn a little bit more about business and careers, you can use that as a little hub to learn. But you also have the network outside of that as an additional network on top of your school.
Okay. So something about the working environment at Accenture. So other consulting firms, like especially management consulting like McKinsey, Boston Consulting, and so on, are known for this culture of up or out. You either go up the ladder or you're asked to leave. Is that the same in Accenture, and especially in Accenture and IT consulting?
I can only speak from my experience, but for me, it definitely is not like that, because of the fact that like if you do well, you stay. But if you don't do well, that's probably going to be something else, but that's like every other company. But I haven't really heard of up or out, other than the fact that maybe people are like, oh, why am I not promoted for the third year in a row? Then they probably would have leave. So, but it's not something where, at least from what I heard, that the firm would force them out just because they haven't advanced.
Okay, so what do you think are the things that Accenture looks for when deciding whether to promote somebody or not? Is it just experience? So after 2 or 3 years, you are expected to go up the ladder, or is it something else?
That is a factor, but it's not the factor. So I think like from what my experience is that they're not like, okay, you're 2 years in, you're gonna get promoted regardless of how well or poorly you went. It's really more about how is your client work? What's your plus one? In this case, this is your initiative work on what are you doing to bring value back to the firm. And then also like the cherry on top, like what kind of person are you? Because if you do all of that well, but no one likes you, no one's gonna want to push you up, because they're gonna be like,
Okay.
oh, like he may do the work well, or maybe he's doing the things that we set to him to do, but like maybe that person just is a horrible person to work with. But in general, like that's what I would say is a big factor, is that it's a whole well-rounded answer of work, your plus one, in this case your initiative work, and then also who are you as a person. But I think like in general, to succeed, you do need to kind of put yourself out there. It's not like something where you could just take the back seat and do well.
Okay. So another question that I have about the hiring process is, do they ask people about extracurricular activities or not? And if so, what do you think are the extracurricular activities that will stand out the most?
I think a lot of consulting firms definitely do focus on extracurriculars because it's one thing to have good grades, it's another to say like, oh, I have all these internships and whatnot. But extracurriculars, if you don't have internships or you don't have experience, are a really great way to show I can lead and do this. Maybe I could work with 100 people and then I was able to organize and do something like that. Because I think it's the closest to managing, because in this case, you don't really have a boss telling you what to do. You are the boss if you were to hold up a leadership role. So that's why it's a great test to say like, okay, what can you do? And then I think one big thing about it is that a lot of your behavioral questions are like, oh, tell me about a time you had to work with a slacker, or maybe like a difficult decision for your team. These are usually the best times to talk about it because you're doing this in a nice environment where like no matter how you fail, it's still gonna be okay. But with a extracurricular activity, you have a lot of answers that you can provide just on that is not even out in the real world. So if you have extracurriculars, I think it will show that you're well-rounded. You don't just have internships or jobs. You also do provide value to the firm.
Okay, so another question that I have is, what are the benefits of working at Accenture aside from traveling and salary? I know, for example, some investment banks pay the employees Ubers for moving around. Do you have life insurance or something else that Accenture gives to all its employees?
I can't really speak for all countries, but I can say that at least for the US, you get health insurance, you get life insurance, you get a lot of like commuter benefits that are pre-tax deductions, and a lot of in consulting, like you do also get a lot of free expense paid things too, because like let's say for example you go to Iceland, my flight was covered, my food was covered, my Ubers were covered, my hotel was covered, everything was covered because it was on expense on the client account. But it is not something that's just like to expect because that is specific to the client work. If you're just trying to like say like, hey, let's just go to McDonald's or something like that and get some lunch with a coworker, that's probably not going to get covered. But it really does depend on the situation, because if you had like a company event, maybe you could get that covered. But like for example, I'm office champion for my office, so I do actually get a lot of cool perks, so I can organize these and then get free covered. So that's like one thing. I would say that at Accenture, it is global too. So that means that you can work with a lot of people around the world. And also this means global clientele. So there's a lot of opportunities where you can actually relocate, and the client account or the firm itself will pay for your relocation. So in this case, like let's say for example, you want to go to Singapore and then you have a client there, they'll pay for your hotel. Well, in this case, they'll pay for your apartment, they'll pay for your food, they'll pay for your relocation costs. All of that will be paid out of the client. But I would say that like again, it does depend, because sometimes if it's like out of your own will and it's transfer is a little bit different than relocated for project and brought back.
So you talked about events. Does Accenture often organizes events in order for you, for example, to build relations with your colleagues or with external people? Is that something that Accenture values a lot?
Yeah, we definitely do that. I think like almost every consulting firm is going to do that too, because there's two different ways you can say it. Like one is more corporate functions. So in this case, recruiting, you're going to need to do like maybe you go attend a career fair. Another one could also be like you're going to a conference representing Accenture. You could do that as well. Then you also have the ERG side. So that's really like employee resource groups. Think of it as clubs. Like maybe they want to go to the soup kitchen every week, or maybe they want to have like a session for Asian Americans and then they have like a meetup for that, or networking or anything like that. Then you also have maybe like if you're a veteran, then you can have like a network there. So there's a lot in there, and I think a lot of it is really just, it's not really of what does Accenture provide? It's really what do you want to provide, because these are all run by employees. This is what I meant by plus one. These are all plus ones for them. So if you don't put in your work, you're not going to get as much work value too. So as me, I'm a office champion, so I organize events for the New York office specifically for the Workday practice. So if there was no one that stepped up to the plate, nothing's going to happen. But it really is dependent on what the employees want. It will happen if you have the drive.
Okay. So, can you tell us a bit about how the salary structure works in IT consulting, and how does that change once you go up the ladder from a entry-level worker to a senior manager?
This is going to differ by country, but I know for at least in the US, and I think this is going to be about the same for all the other firms, it's not just Accenture, is that you have a base salary and then you have performance bonus. And sometimes you do have like a merit bonus as well. So these are all like the base salary is usually dependent on where you live. So New York is tend to be like the highest cost of living, so your salary is going to be higher than maybe like somewhere where it's way lower. And then you also have bonuses that are dependent on your performance. Usually these bonuses are pretty good. It really does depend on how the firm does though. So it's not like even though you do really well, like if the firm suffers, you're not going to get that much budget for your bonus. And then you also do have a lot of options that are specific to your firm. So in this case, at Accenture, we are a public company, so there are like stocks options that you can get, and that does take like a percentage that off of your paycheck every week or every pay period, and then that way it will go towards stocks, and you get like a discount off of the stock. So that's one perk if you consider that compensation. The health insurance plans are also considered compensation. I'm currently on my dad's. Honestly, I have not really looked into that, but that is also something that people consider as compensation as well. So I think it really does depend on where you fall in the country and also the structure at your firm. Because if you're at a smaller firm where it's private, you may have more of like a percentage share of the profits instead of just a base salary. But it also depends on how high you are, because if you're just an analyst, you're probably just giving in like a salary. But if you're higher up, like a managing director, partner, you probably have a percentage share of the profits.
Okay, so once you go up the ladder at Accenture, do they give you a larger percentage of your salary in stock options, or it's mainly cash and then a small part in stock options?
That's the part that I don't really know, because I haven't really spoken to anyone that is willing to talk about this, and I mean, rightfully so. I
Okay.
don't think they want to tell us.
Okay. So as an entry level consultant, you don't get stock options.
You do get stocks, but it is not the way that like you get a share of the profits. It's really like you get a discounted price off of the stocks. Like in our case, let's say for example the stock is $300. When we have like a pay period and then we have the enrollment period, the time that they're going to buy it will be that price, but then minus 10% because you get that discount. So you could technically sell on the same day and you get a 10% profit.
Nice.
But I think like for most firms, I think only managing directors and partners get a cut because of the fact that it's like private and it's not necessarily public where you have stocks.
Okay. So so how is IT consulting doing from a work-life balance perspective? So is it good or not? And are there any roles what are the roles that are worse from a work-life balance perspective, and what are the roles that are somehow better than your role, perhaps?
Work-life balance definitely differs by the firm, because I think from what I heard is that a lot of big four are notorious for really bad work-life balance. So every time when they talk to me about like, hey, Christine, like how many hours a week do you work? And I'm like, I only work 40. And they're like, what? How is that possible? And I think it really does depend on the stage of where your project is as well, because there are projects that go like this, so that way like you may have only as low as 10 hours a week, and you may also have as high as 80 hours a week. For me, I've been actually pretty consistent with 40 because of the fact that I do partial staffing. So it's not like I'm on a project 100% of the time. Sometimes I have like maybe 3 projects going at the same time. So if one's slow, one's other a little bit stronger, and then vice versa. So that's like how it's like been for me. And I think a lot of the people, like the higher you go where it's more commission based, where maybe it's like, okay, how much sales did you lock in? Then probably you're going to work a little bit harder outside your hours, because it's not necessarily salary. It's also dependent on a variable. So that one, you probably work a little bit more. And I think it really is dependent on your boundaries, because there's a lot of people who like, well, I did the work and it's like been 40 hours. Do I stop here or do I keep on going? And I think a lot of people in consulting, they feel pressured to keep on going because they see other people in the team going on as well. So it really is like not just the firm, but the team, because I think if the team dynamic is good, where like, okay, well, at 3 p.m. I need to go pick up my kids. If you have that kind of dynamic, I think it's really good because they know that you have a life outside of work. However, if you have a team where everyone's working 80 hours a week and then you're just the only one working 40 hours, it will look kind of bad on you. But sometimes it's just you may have to kind of put in the hours. I've been lucky that all of my projects have not been like that because of the way it's structured. And in IT consulting, it is very specific to deliverables. If you have like maybe, for example, you need this feature out or this release is done, then you probably are going to have a little bit more crunch time around the time that release time is coming up. But like leading up, it really depends on maybe what the limitations, because with technology, it's like, okay, we can't code this, or maybe this can't be possible. What are the workarounds? And it does add a little bit more hours. But the best thing is that we always have PMO. So they have like a steering committee that works on like, how do we mitigate these risks? So they try to figure out before it gets to that point. So your work-life balance should be way better than before, hopefully. But again, like the client always wants something that may or may not be possible. So you may be forced to put in the hours. And it really also depends on the very beginning, like how long is the timeline too? Because if it is a short timeline to do a lot of things, you're definitely going to be working a lot of hours. But for a lot of projects, if they're scoped properly, they're going to be balanced. They're not going to be like constantly forcing you to work a lot of hours, or you're going to be lacking hours. So I hate to always say this about consulting, but it really depends. And it's one thing that, like, for example, you could be on a project that has a lot of hours, but it really is on your personal tolerance. How much are you willing to work? And are you willing to say, yes, I can't work 80 hours because I have to work only 40 hours because I have kids or I have other obligations?
Okay, so one last thing that I would like to ask you is it possible to negotiate your salary, or and if so, is that something that you can do only in senior positions, or is it something that you can do even at entry level roles?
I think everyone should negotiate. It is very intimidating though if you just went right out of university and like, what do I have? Like, how come I can negotiate? But it really is, do your research. Like, first off, what is the market rate out there for that role in your location? It does matter of your location, because like what it is in New York is probably going to be different in Italy. So for that reason, it's just gonna be like, well, you want to make sure you are setting reasonable expectations. And then also, like, if you were to go a little bit above that, why are you above average? What are the skill set? What are the experiences that you bring in that can help the firm or help the projects a little bit longer in the long run? So that's like something to think about. For me, when I got my offer at Accenture after I graduated from university, I was like, well, I think it's reasonable. So I didn't really negotiate, but usually people who do negotiate, it's always better to ask, can you negotiate first before you shut it down? Like, yeah, I don't need it. Because I've seen a lot of people who get like a lot of big bonuses or a lot of big base salary increases. And then because of that, they're way further down, because when you get promotions, it's off of the base salary. So if your base salary was way higher than this other person, each bonus or each promotion you get is going to be way higher than that other person, because it's incremental. So I think that's also one big reason why a lot of women have a pay gap, is because of the fact that a lot of women don't negotiate while men do. So because of that reason, there may be a pay gap because of the fact that they get a higher salary increase or bonus from that increase, but the woman may or may not want to because of confidence. So it's always better just ask, are you first off open to negotiation, and then do your research and back it up as well of like, what are the things that you want to do? And I think a lot of people also forget, after you accept the offer, you can still negotiate your salary within your job. Each time you have like a performance role, or maybe like if you're just not happy with your salary, you can do it. You just have to make sure you did all the research and do all the groundwork.
Okay, but that ability to negotiate is something that personally I think is something that you can do once you have an experience. What do you think are the things that you can leverage even as a graduate fresh out of university?
Yeah, so I think a lot of people, if you can get two offers, that's like the best way.
Okay,
So
you can tell the other company offered me more or something
yeah,
like that.
yeah, you could say like, maybe let's give you an example of Accenture and PwC. If Accenture gave you 100,000 and PwC gave you 80,000, something like that, you could say, hey, PwC, Accenture gave me 100,000. What are you gonna do about it? Are you gonna like increase it? Otherwise, I'm gonna go with Accenture. You could do that too. But the thing is, like, it's not just the base salary. You can also negotiate for like, oh, I also want to be 100% remote. that is one thing that people are now negotiating a little bit more because of the fact that like, oh, well, maybe I'm in California, I don't want to move all the way to New York. So that is one thing as well to negotiate for. Another one could be PTO, paid time off. So maybe like instead of 20 days, they want to do 40 days or be able to do a leave of absence or anything like that. So that is something you can actually negotiate. But I think a lot of times, like how as a student can you negotiate is really like knowing your market rate. Most people, I think, could get the market rate because of the fact that like maybe market rate 60,000, but what you got offered is 30,000. You can totally negotiate for that, regardless of the fact that you think you're unqualified or not, just because it's not even market rate. Like it's not even enough to be able to live in wherever location you're trying to talk about, probably. So do the research as well of like, okay, this is typical cost of how much it would be to live here. So you're saying that even with my salary, I can't even cover my bills. So something as simple as that, you don't even need experience to be able to do that. You could just say like, hey, it doesn't even cover the bills. So what's up?
Okay, pretty clear. So I'm done with the questions. So if you have anything else, any tips you would like to share with us, some interview tips that you would like to share with us, go ahead. Otherwise, I'm done with the questions.
Okay, so I guess like my big follow-up for you guys is just make sure you know what you are, like in terms of what you like, what you want to do, and then form a story around that because a lot of times it's just, okay, you know what you like, you want to do this, but then does it actually work with what you want to do it in the long run? That's how I think like I got to this point is because of the fact that I've been very conscientious with what I like to do and what I've been doing, rather than just like, okay, maybe my parents have wanted me to be an engineer. Should I do that just because they say that? No. But you want to see what can you do that you would do well in, what do you like to do, and then also what gets you paid. So basically the ikigai, if you guys know about that, I like live by that. So really seeing that, you can see what you want to do regardless of whatever you are, because you can really make things work. And one thing I do want to say is like if you're interested in technology consulting, definitely check out my YouTube channel. I also have a podcast as well. And the technology consulting community, if you are trying to get that experience, you can join the pro bono consulting program and you can get the real life experience you can get as a consultant with technology and consulting.
Okay, so thank you for your contribution. Um, So this is it for today for this interview. I'm Giacomo. Thank you, Christine, for being with us. And see you the next time. This is Hustle Hub.
All right. Thank you so much.